This is Evelyn Brooks, and you're listening to Echoes of 1970. Today's story kept me awake for 3 nights after I first heard it. I found this recording in a box marked Never Air, dated November 1971. The letter inside was written by someone who called himself Samuel Crane. No one knew why he disappeared that winter, but deep down, everyone in that small Montana town knew something had ended. Samuel Crane arrived at Thornfield Station on a Tuesday morning when the fog was so thick you couldn't see your own hands. The station wasn't by any ocean. It sat on the edge of Lake Mercer, a body of water so deep that locals said it had no bottom. They said other things too, but Samuel didn't believe in superstitions. He was 42 years old, recently divorced, and tired of people. The job posting had been perfect. Lighthouse keeper needed, minimal human contact, must be comfortable with isolation. He'd applied within an hour of seeing it. 3 weeks later, he was standing at the door of a stone tower that looked like it had been there since the beginning of time. The previous keeper, a man named Gerald Whitmore, had left suddenly. The regional supervisor who handed Samuel the keys mentioned this only once. Gerald had worked there for 11 years without incident. Then, one morning in October, he'd packed a single bag and walked into town. He'd told the supervisor he couldn't stay another night. When pressed for details, Gerald had simply said, "The lake remembers everything." Samuel thought that was poetic nonsense. He took the keys, signed the paperwork, and moved into the keeper's quarters that same afternoon. The tower was functional, but sparse. A narrow bed, a wood stove, shelves lined with maritime logs dating back to 1889, and a radio that worked only sometimes. The light itself was automated now, but someone still needed to maintain it, monitor the weather patterns, and report any anomalies on the lake. The first week passed without incident. Samuel fell into a rhythm. He woke at dawn, checked the equipment, made coffee, and spent his mornings reading the old logs. The previous keepers had been meticulous in their record-keeping. Every entry documented the same things: weather conditions, visibility range, occasional boats passing through, maintenance notes. But Samuel began noticing something strange in the older entries. Every few years, there would be a gap, sometimes just a day or two, sometimes a week, and when the entries resumed, the handwriting would be different, shakier, as if whoever had written them had been deeply unsettled. One entry from 1923 caught his attention. November 18th. No boats today. Fog persists. I heard it again last night. Closer this time. I will not write what it said. Samuel flipped through more pages. Another entry from 1934. The voice came from the water. It knew my daughter's name. It knew she died 3 years ago. I have requested a transfer. He closed the log and set it aside. Grief did strange things to people, he reasoned. Isolation, even stranger things. He wouldn't let his mind play tricks on him, the way it had played tricks on others. That night, Samuel made dinner and sat by the window overlooking the lake. The water was perfectly still, like dark glass. The lighthouse beams swept across it in steady intervals, illuminating nothing but empty expanse. He watched until his eyes grew heavy, then went to bed. He woke to the sound of knocking. 3 deliberate knocks on the tower door. Samuel checked his watch. 2:47 in the morning. He sat up, listening. The knocking came again. Same rhythm, same intensity. He pulled on his boots and descended the spiral staircase. The tower had no visitors after dark, and the nearest town was 8 miles away. When he reached the door, he called out, "Who's there?" No answer. He opened the door. The fog had returned, thick and suffocating. He could barely see past the threshold. There was no one there. No footprints in the dirt. No sound of retreating footsteps. Samuel closed the door and went back upstairs. He told himself it was the wind, though he knew the wind didn't knock in perfect rhythm. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The knocking happened again the following night. Same time, same 3 knocks. This time, Samuel didn't go downstairs. He lay in bed and waited for it to stop. After the third knock, there was silence. Then, barely audible, a voice from outside. "Samuel." His blood went cold. The voice was soft, almost gentle. It sounded like his ex-wife, but that was impossible. She was in Chicago, had been for 6 months. She didn't even know where he was. "Samuel, I need you to listen." He sat up. His hands were trembling. He wanted to go downstairs, wanted to open the door and prove to himself that this was nothing, just his mind playing tricks in the isolation. But something stopped him. Some deep, animal instinct that told him not to move. The voice continued, "You think you're alone out here. You think no one knows your name? But the lake knows. It remembers everything." Samuel didn't respond. He barely breathed. The voice stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the words. He sat in that silence until dawn. And when the sun finally rose, he felt like he'd aged 10 years. The next morning, he radioed the supervisor. He tried to keep his voice steady as he explained what had happened. The supervisor listened without interrupting. When Samuel finished, there was a long pause on the other end. "Gerald said the same thing," the supervisor finally said. "He said it sounded like his mother." "What do you mean?" "The voice. Gerald said it sounded exactly like his mother. She'd been dead for 20 years. Samuel felt his stomach turn. "What is this place?" The supervisor sighed. "I don't know, but every keeper who's stayed longer than 2 weeks reports the same thing. A voice. Always someone they knew. Always at night. Why didn't you tell me this before? Would you have taken the job?" Samuel didn't answer. They both knew the truth. He needed the money. He needed the isolation. He'd needed to disappear. And now he was stuck in a place where something else was doing the disappearing. The supervisor continued, "Look, I can't explain it. No one can. But I'll tell you what I told Gerald. Don't answer it. Don't acknowledge it. And whatever you do, don't open the door after dark." Samuel hung up. He spent the rest of the day checking the equipment, trying to distract himself. But his mind kept returning to the voice. It had sounded so real, so convincing. He wondered what would have happened if he'd opened the door. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the window with a flashlight and watched the lake. The water was calm, but there was something about it that felt wrong. It was too still, too quiet, like it was waiting. The knocking came at 2:47, just like before. Samuel didn't move. He sat in his chair and gripped the flashlight until his knuckles turned white. The voice followed. "Samuel, please. I need to tell you something." It was his ex-wife's voice again. Perfect inflection. Perfect tone. He closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe. "You left me," the voice said. "You left without saying goodbye. Don't you think I deserve an explanation?" Samuel's jaw tightened. He wanted to respond, wanted to shout that she'd been the one who'd left first, that she'd taken everything and disappeared into a new life while he'd fallen apart. But he stayed silent. The voice grew softer. "I still think about you. I still wonder if you're okay." Tears burned in Samuel's eyes. He hated how real it sounded, how much he wanted to believe it. "Open the door, Samuel. Let me see you one more time." He stood up. His body moved before his mind could stop it. He walked toward the staircase, one step at a time. The voice kept talking, kept pulling him forward with words he'd wanted to hear for months. But then he stopped. His hand was on the railing. He looked down, at the door below, and saw something that made his breath catch. Water. There was water seeping under the door. Not a lot, just a thin line spreading across the stone floor. But the lake was 50 yards away. There was no way water should be reaching the tower. Samuel stepped back. The voice outside grew louder. "Samuel, open the door. Please." He turned and ran back upstairs. He locked himself in the keeper's quarters and pressed his back against the wall. Below, he could hear the water spreading. He could hear something else, too. A sound like breathing. Wet and heavy. The voice changed. It no longer sounded like his ex-wife. It sounded like nothing human. "You can't stay in there forever." Samuel grabbed the radio and called for help. No one answered. He tried again and again, but the line was dead. He was alone. Completely alone. The water kept rising. He could hear it now, climbing the staircase step by step. The breathing grew louder, and then the voice spoke one last time. "The lake remembers everything, Samuel. Even the things you tried to forget." He froze. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. There was something he'd tried to forget, something he'd buried so deep he thought it would never surface. 5 years ago, he'd been driving home late one night. He'd been drinking, not much, but enough. A kid had run into the street chasing a ball. Samuel had swerved. The kid had lived. But the kid's older sister, who'd been standing on the sidewalk, hadn't. She'd been struck by another car that had swerved to avoid Samuel. He'd never told anyone. The police had ruled it an accident. No charges were filed. But Samuel knew the truth. He'd caused it. He'd set everything in motion. And now, somehow, the lake knew too. The water reached the top of the stairs. Samuel watched as it spread across the floor toward him. In the water, he saw a reflection that wasn't his own. A young girl, maybe 16, staring up at him with empty eyes. "You remember me," the voice said. But it wasn't coming from the water anymore. It was coming from inside his own head. Samuel collapsed to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The water stopped. The reflection faded. And then, as quickly as it had come, everything went silent. When Samuel opened his eyes, the sun was rising. The water was gone. The door was closed. Everything looked exactly as it had the day before. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined the entire thing. But when he looked at his hands, they were still shaking. But something had changed. Samuel could feel it in the air, in the way the morning light fell through the windows. The tower felt different now, heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed what had happened during the night. He walked downstairs slowly. Every step echoed louder than it should have. When he reached the door, he placed his hand against the wood. It was cold, too cold for a summer morning. He pulled his hand back and noticed something he hadn't seen before. Scratches on the inside of the door. Long, deep gouges in the wood, as if someone had tried to claw their way out, or claw their way in. Samuel spent that day going through the old logs more carefully. He wasn't just looking for mentions of voices or strange occurrences anymore. He was looking for patterns, something that might explain what was happening at Thornfield Station. What he found disturbed him more than the voice had. Every keeper who had stayed longer than a month had documented the same progression. First, the knocking, then the voice, then the water. But there was a fourth stage that Samuel hadn't experienced yet. The logs called it the visitation. One entry from 1947 described it in detail. August 12th. It came into my room last night. I could see it standing at the foot of my bed. It looked like Margaret, but it wasn't her. The eyes were wrong, too dark, too knowing. It stood there for hours, just watching me. When I finally found the courage to speak, it smiled. Then it was gone. "I am leaving at first light." Another entry from 1958. The visitation lasted 3 nights. Each night it stayed longer. Each night it came closer. On the third night, it sat on the edge of my bed. It touched my face with hands that felt like ice water. It whispered things I cannot write here. Things about myself I had never told anyone. Things I had never even admitted to myself. I do not know how it knows these things. I do not want to know. Samuel closed the log. His heart was pounding. If the pattern held, he had one more night before the visitation began. One more night to decide whether to stay or run. But where would he run to? Back to Chicago? Back to a life he'd already abandoned? Back to the guilt that had driven him here in the first place? He thought about the girl in the water, the reflection with empty eyes. She had been 16 years old. Her name was Claire Hoffman. He'd learned that from the newspaper articles he'd obsessively read in the weeks after the accident. She'd been an honor student. She'd played violin. She'd had her whole life ahead of her. And Samuel had taken it away. Not directly, not intentionally. But the chain of events had started with him. with his decision to get behind the wheel after 3 beers, with his split-second swerve that had caused another driver to panic, with his cowardice in never coming forward, never admitting his role in what had happened. The lake knew. Somehow, impossibly, it knew. That night, Samuel didn't try to sleep. He sat in the keeper's quarters with every light on, the radio beside him, even though it didn't work, a knife from the kitchen in his lap, even though he knew it would be useless against whatever was coming. The knocking came at 2:47. He didn't move. The voice came next. "Samuel, I need to show you something." It was Claire's voice now. Young, uncertain, painfully alive. He closed his eyes and tried not to listen. "I know you're scared," she continued. "I was scared too. That night, I heard the tires screaming. I heard my brother yelling. And then everything went dark. It didn't hurt as much as you'd think, but it was lonely. So lonely." Samuel's hands tightened around the knife handle. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring me back," Claire's voice said. "Sorry doesn't give me the life I should have had. The graduation, the college, the family, the future. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you took from me?" "Every day," Samuel said, tears streaming down his face. "Every single day." The water began seeping under the door again, but this time it moved faster. It rushed up the stairs like a living thing, hungry and purposeful. Samuel stood up, backing against the far wall. The water filled the room in seconds, rising to his ankles, his knees, his waist. And then she appeared. Not a reflection this time. Claire Hoffman stood in the water in front of him, as solid and real as anything he'd ever seen. She looked exactly as she had in the newspaper photos. Long dark hair, gentle eyes, a face that should have grown older but never would. "I've been waiting for you," she said. "Not just you, all of you, everyone who runs here thinking they can escape what they've done. The lake collects you. It holds you. It makes you face the truth." Samuel couldn't speak. His throat had closed. All he could do was stare at her and wish with every fiber of his being that he could undo what had been done. Claire stepped closer. The water around them began to glow with a faint, sickly light. "There are others here, Samuel. Others like you. Keepers who came running from their pasts. Some of them stayed. Some of them left. But none of them escaped. Not really. Because the lake doesn't just remember. It follows." "What do you want from me?" Samuel managed to ask. "I want you to understand," Claire said. "I want you to feel what I felt. The confusion, the fear, the absolute unfairness of having your life stolen away in a single moment. And then I want you to decide." "Decide what? Whether you can live with it? Whether you deserve to?" The water rose higher. It reached Samuel's chest, his neck, his chin. He gasped for air, trying to keep his head above the surface. Claire watched him struggle with an expression that was neither cruel nor kind, just patient, eternal. "Some of the keepers chose to stay," she said. "They walked into the lake and never came back. They're down there now, at the bottom where no light reaches. They've joined the others, all the people who couldn't live with what they'd done. The lake takes them. It keeps them. It makes sure they never hurt anyone again." Samuel's head went under. The water was freezing, darker than any darkness he'd known. He could feel things in the water with him. Hands, bodies, faces pressed close to his. All the keepers who had come before. All the guilty souls the lake had claimed. And in that moment, drowning in his own guilt, Samuel understood something crucial. The lake wasn't punishing him. It was offering him a choice, a way out, a way to finally stop running. His lungs burned. His vision began to fade. He thought about Claire, and all the years she'd never have. He thought about his ex-wife, and the life he'd destroyed through his drinking and his secrets. He thought about all the mornings he'd woken up, wishing he was someone else, somewhere else, something else. The lake could give him that. The lake could make him disappear completely. No more guilt, no more shame, no more endless replay of that terrible night. Just darkness, just silence, just peace. But then another thought pushed through the drowning haze. What about the people he'd leave behind? His sister, who still called him every week even though he never answered. His father, who'd driven 8 hours to help him move into the lighthouse without asking a single question about why he needed to go. The handful of friends who'd tried to reach out, who'd tried to tell him that he didn't have to carry this alone. If he stayed in the lake, he'd be taking the coward's way out again. Just like he'd done by not going to the police. Just like he'd done by running to this isolated tower. Just like he'd done every single time life had demanded that he face the consequences of his actions. Samuel kicked hard. He pushed against the water with every ounce of strength he had left. His head broke the surface. He gasped, choking, clawing for air. Claire stood beside him, still watching. "You choose to live," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Samuel gasped. "Not because I deserve to, but because dying would be too easy. Because someone needs to remember you. Someone needs to carry the weight of what happened. And that someone has to be me." The water began to recede. It flowed back down the stairs, back through the cracks in the door, back toward the lake where it belonged. Claire's form started to fade, becoming translucent in the growing dawn light. "The lake will always be here," she said softly. "Whenever you forget, whenever you try to run again, it will call you back. It will remind you." "I know," Samuel said. "And I'll answer, not by drowning, but by living, by making sure your name isn't forgotten, by making sure what happened to you means something." Claire smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "Then go. Leave this place. Do what you should have done 5 years ago. Tell the truth. Face what you've done. Live with it. That's the only way forward." She vanished. The water was gone. The sun was rising over Lake Mercer, painting the surface gold and crimson. Samuel stood in the keeper's quarters, soaked to the bone, shaking with cold and exhaustion, and something that might have been hope. He packed his single bag. He walked the 8 miles into town. And when he reached the sheriff's office, he asked to speak to someone about an accident that had happened 5 years ago in Chicago. An accident involving a girl named Claire Hoffman. An accident he had caused. The sheriff listened. He made calls. Within 24 hours, Chicago police were involved. The investigation was reopened. Samuel gave his statement, detailed and honest. He didn't try to minimize his role. He didn't make excuses. He just told the truth. There were legal consequences. Charges were filed. A trial was scheduled. Samuel faced all of it without running. His lawyer argued for leniency, cited his cooperation, mentioned his clean record aside from this one terrible mistake. The judge listened and sentenced Samuel to 2 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. It was lighter than it could have been, but heavier than any punishment Samuel had imagined. He served his time. Every day in prison, he thought about Claire. Every day, he wrote letters to her family. Most went unanswered, but he kept writing. Apologies, memories, promises that he would never forget, never let her death be meaningless. When he was released, Samuel didn't go back to Chicago. He moved to a small town in Oregon and got a job as a counselor at a community center. He worked with troubled kids, kids who'd made mistakes, kids who were drowning in guilt and shame and didn't know how to surface. He told them his story, all of it, the accident, the running, the lighthouse, the lake, the choice between drowning and living. He told them that guilt would never go away completely, but it could become something else, something that made you better instead of bitter, something that pushed you to help others instead of hurting yourself. Some of them listened, some of them didn't, but Samuel kept showing up, kept telling the truth, kept living with what he'd done instead of running from it. Years passed. Samuel grew older. His hair turned gray. His hands developed arthritis, but he never stopped thinking about Lake Mercer, about the lighthouse, about the voice in the water that had offered him oblivion and the strength he'd somehow found to refuse it. He never went back to Thornfield Station. He didn't need to. The lake had taught him everything it needed to teach him, and he carried that lesson every single day. Evelyn Brooks paused in her narration. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I received a letter from Samuel Crane 3 months ago. He's 71 now, still counseling, still telling his story, still living with the weight of what he did. He wanted me to share this with anyone who might be listening, anyone who's running from something they can't face, anyone who thinks disappearing is the answer. She cleared her throat. He wrote, "Tell them that the lake is inside all of us. We all have depths we're afraid to explore, secrets we've buried so deep we think they'll never surface. But they always do. Always. And when they do, we have a choice. We can drown in them, or we can learn to swim. I almost drowned. I came so close, but I chose to swim. And that choice, as painful as it was, saved my life." Evelyn let the words hang in the air. Samuel Crane disappeared from Thornfield Station in November 1971. But unlike the keepers before him, he didn't vanish into the lake. He walked away. He faced his past. He spent the rest of his life trying to make amends for something that could never truly be amended. And in doing so, he found something the lake couldn't give him. Not peace, not forgiveness, but purpose. A reason to keep living even when living hurt more than anything else. The room fell quiet. Evelyn's voice softened to barely a whisper. Thornfield Station is still there. Still operational. They've had 43 keepers since Samuel left. Some stay for months, some for just days, but they all report the same thing. The knocking, the voice, the water, the choice. And each of them has to decide for themselves whether they'll drown or swim, whether they'll stay or go, whether they'll face the truth or run from it one more time. She paused, and you could hear the weight of decades in her silence. I think about this story often, about what it means to carry guilt, about what it means to run from your past, about what waits for us when we finally stop running. And I think Samuel got it right. The lake isn't a place. It's not even really about water or voices or ghosts. It's about the moment when you can't run anymore, when you have to look at yourself, truly look, and decide whether you can live with what you see. Evelyn took a slow, measured breath. Can you? Can any of us? I don't know. But I know this much. Running doesn't work. Hiding doesn't work. The lake always finds you. Whether it's a real body of water in Montana or the darkness inside your own head, it finds you. And when it does, you'll have to make the same choice Samuel made. Drown or swim. Die or live. Run or face it. Another pause, longer this time. If you're listening to this and you're running from something, I want you to know. The lake is waiting. It's patient. It's relentless. But it's also fair. It gives you a choice. And that choice, terrifying as it is also a gift. Because as long as you can choose, there's hope. As long as you can swim, you're not lost. You're just finding your way back to the surface. Evelyn's voice broke slightly. Samuel Crane found his way back. It took him years. It cost him everything. But he made it. And if he can do it, maybe we all can. Maybe that's the real story here. Not about a haunted lighthouse or a mysterious lake, but about a man who was drowning and chose to breathe, who was dying and chose to live, who was lost and chose to find himself, even though it meant facing the worst thing he'd ever done. The recording seemed to stretch into infinity. Finally, Evelyn spoke one last time. This is Evelyn Brooks, and you've been listening to Echoes of 1970. Thank you for hearing Samuel's story. Thank you for listening to mine. And if you're carrying something heavy tonight, if you're drowning in something you can't name, I hope you'll remember what the lake taught Samuel. You have a choice. You always have a choice. The question is, which one will you make? Silence fell, complete and total. And in that silence, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear it, the gentle lap of water against stone, the whisper of a voice calling your name, the sound of something patient and ancient, waiting at the edge of a lake that remembers everything, waiting for your choice, waiting to see if you'll drown or if you'll swim, waiting to discover whether you'll become another echo or whether you'll find the strength to become something more. The story ends here. But the choice, as always, remains yours.